Bishop Paul Tighe is the secretary of the Section for Culture of the Dicastery for Culture and Education, which, along with the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, published Antiqua et Nova on January 14th. Welcome to Inside the Vatican, Bishop Tighe.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you.
So, can you start by giving us a quick overview of Antiqua et Nova? I'm not sure how many of our listeners have already read it. So, what are some of the key takeaways?
I would say what it is it's a document that's attempting at one level to synthesize many of the things the Vatican, in its different offices, in different papal statements, in different messages, has been saying about AI on different occasions and trying to bring that together and give it a coherence. That's one thing it's doing. It's also a document that was produced by, as you say, a joint working group coming from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith and for us here at Culture and Education. And that, I think, becomes obvious because what the document tries to do is to link the ethical, cultural, social impacts of AI with a deeper reflection of what we might call the anthropological, the meaning of what it is to be human. And as you know, the Doctrine of the Faith have been working on issues about human dignity quite a lot recently, have had different statements on that. So this is, in many ways, an integration of the anthropological, theological perspectives of what it means to be human and how AI fits into that picture, and then addressing, or at least beginning to address, some of the more obvious headline issues that we hear about day in, day out in normal talk. So everybody's talking about the future of work, about economic impact of AI, talking about its likely impact on warfare, looking at its questions of its potential benefits for the environment, and yet its impact on the environment. So all of those issues are looked at, but we try to frame them by opening up the more fundamental question, which is the question about what it means to be human and what is intelligence and what
Hmm.
is it that makes life worthwhile. Some of the big questions, UNESCO said AI in one sense was, and it's a term I like, it's an anthropological disruption.
Mm.
Okay, it's causing us to think again about what it makes us to be human. And that's, I think, where we want to have the debate and the discussion that AI, which has extraordinary potential, will actually continue to be not so much an end in itself or a tool in itself, but something that human beings can ensure serves its potential to be something very good for humans, both as individuals and as communities.
I want to ask you specifically about this document. How long was it in the works, and why release it now?
What I would say was very simply happened was that you'd had a growing body of materials that those who were experts could know and find.
Hmm.
And this was an effort for our own sake internally to try and synthesize that, to bring it together, to harmonize it, and to give it maybe a bit more coherence and background. A lot of the
Hmm.
previous things were either messages written on a particular theme or addresses of the Pope to particular groups
Hmm.
or statements that had emerged in the context of particular conferences. So this was a bringing of it together. And my understanding of why it was asked for was that it was looked on as having something that we can now say, well, here we find it. It's here. And as other groups within the Vatican may engage with different issues, they have something formal that holds it together. We were getting a thing from lots of bishops' conferences around the world. We're saying we want to think about AI and we want to do something about AI because in many parts of the world they can have very good discussions with local technology companies and
Mm.
scientific players, and particularly as AI is becoming more a feature of education
Right.
globally. Lots of bishops' conferences are saying, how do we think about the future use of AI in the context of education? So this was and trying to offer a service to them of something that brings it together. So it's a document that probably took about 6 months to emerge. And the timing of it, we were being complimented on our ability to come out the day after the major moves in the market as Chinese AI became a feature. I have to say the date had been chosen as the feast of St. Thomas Aquinas, and anything else was purely coincidental. But
Coincidental.
the timing was not bad. Having said that, yes,
Indeed, indeed.
yeah.
The key kind of underlying theme of this document is that human intelligence and artificial intelligence are different things, and that, artificial intelligence has to be at the service of the common good, of the human, what makes life worthwhile, right? I wonder if you could talk to me about some of the specific concerns. You mentioned a few areas that you touched on, but what the document had to say about something like work or social justice.
Yeah, I would say let's take something like work. And that's a
Mhm.
relatively easy one because the Catholic social teaching has had a lot to say about work. Some of the discussions that you will hear in the tech space about the future of work will acknowledge that they will blithely assure us that all new technologies have created more work in the long term. That's not so clear in this case.
Mm.
Also, it's going to be disruptive for people already working. We've seen what has happened as a result of people losing industrial jobs in the United States. This has the capacity to also displace people working in things like law and accountancy. So it has a potential to be very disruptive. One of the responses from the tech space is very often to say, well, we'll think about a universal income that we
Mhm.
can share with all people. But part of our Catholic tradition would run say, but work isn't just a place I go or something I do to earn a living. It's
Mhm.
also somewhere that allows me to express myself, to express my own creativity, to contribute to the well being of the world. And it's also something very often for many of us, it's a place where we socialize and we form relationships with others. So constantly we're trying to open up maybe those wider human issues. I just give that as one example of it because it's right at the heart of our tradition on
Mhm.
work. So when it comes to the more, as you say, the headline issues about work and warfare, what we're doing there is we're beginning to tease out what our tradition offers by way of insights into thinking of those issues. The Christian warfare recognizes that, I mean, add AI and the potential of automatic weapon systems with what we already have in terms of nuclear weaponry, allowing then for the direct development of cyber warfare, which is a more direct attack on people's digital infrastructure. It's really saying something Pope Francis is always saying. We
Mhm.
really have to rethink war. We have to think about war. This is just too dangerous.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so that's, and as you said at the beginning, part of the thing is, as AI does, is it can replicate, speed up, and magnify certain forms of intelligences that we have developed as human beings. So our ability to collect material, our
Mhm.
ability to analyze materials, our ability to process materials, our ability to draw conclusions on the basis. AI can handle data better than we can. But what AI can't necessarily do is answer the deeper questions about what are the questions we should be posing to that data. How do we think if the data we have in our world already, which is digitalized data, is actually reflective of the truth of the full of the human experience? Because data can handle easily what's easily measurable, not so good necessarily on the qualitative dimensions of life.
Mhm.
And if I was to give an example, one that struck me very recently is one of the areas where people see great potential for AI is the area of healthcare. So in the area of healthcare, there's no doubt that artificial intelligence systems will be able to have access to a range of medical records globally that no individual doctor could have access to. It'll be capable of processing those with a speed that no individual medic could do. It can think about personalized prescriptions depending on the uniqueness of a person's particular illness or category. And that's extraordinary stuff that doctors are celebrating this capacity. In an interesting debate was one group of doctors came out with a very positive thing. This is great. This is fantastic. This is going to liberate the doctor to spend more time with his or her patient, leaving the AI system to do the analysis, to do the prescribing, to do even some of the paperwork that's associated with medicine. Other doctors came along and said, that sounds lovely, but in reality, medicine happens in predefined commercial situations where the pressure will be on us now to see more patients, to
Mm.
see them more quickly, and to be more attentive to what we're prescribing in terms of the outcomes of what we're doing. So they said, yes, the potential is there for this to be great, to liberate the doctor to recover his or her vocation as a human agent who accompanies the patient. But knowing the context in which medicine operates, we have a doubt about it. And then they said there's a second reason why there's a bias against this really achieving its potential, which is to say, okay, yes, the quality of the relationship between the doctor and his or her patient is hugely significant, but that you can't measure. You
Mm,
can measure the amount of time you spend with the patient. You can measure the number of patients you have seen. You can measure how much you bill the patient for the services you provide, but it's very difficult to measure the qualitative dimension of that relationship and
hmm.
therefore tends not to be valued. And some
Right.
doctors say at the end of the day, it'll be an AI algorithm judging us rather than us being in a position. And I think that example, I think, illustrates something that Pope Francis brings out. You know, a lot of ethical talk about AI focuses on it could be used for good and it could be used for bad. And that is
Hmm.
true. But he's
Yeah.
also saying that a lot of AI systems are going to be born with certain kind of biases built into them. And AI systems that are developed by commercial players are likely to be trying to anticipate market requirements rather than necessarily all those potential human benefits that might not be so immediately easily monetized. So it's just an
Yeah.
example of something. Yeah.
No, but that last point that you made about the kind of commercial interests behind AI, that is something that the document spends quite a bit of time on near the end, saying that, you know, we need to think about who exactly is profiting from the development of this AI. I guess in terms of that, where does the Vatican come down in its advocacy? Because you've been working, I say, as the Vatican, which I realize is many, many different offices all working kind of in their own ways on this subject. But the Vatican's been working with tech companies for so long. It's been advocating for AI ethics, even lately with international governments. And I wonder, when it comes to that question of commercial interest, what is the Vatican advocating for?
The Vatican's engagement with the issues of AI was not one cohesive singular project. Different different offices in the Vatican began working on different areas. The people working in integral human development were very immediately interested in questions about the future of work, questions about the environment. In the culture side, we were very interested in the impact of AI just on human life in general. So we probably had a
Hmm.
bigger, broader kind of concern. Then
Yeah.
you had the Pontifical Academy for Life, which took a very particular situation to engage with some of the commercial players to produce a shared set of principles, the Rome Call for Ethics.
Hmm.
I would say that at this stage, in terms of the Vatican taking one singular position on these issues, um, that's not fully emerging. Let's learn together. Let's engage. I think we would all want to be very careful about, notwithstanding the good intentions of many of the people we meet, and we meet many people from the commercial centre who have extremely good intentions and well intentions. I think possibly we've learned from what has happened with social media in general that good intentions are not necessarily enough to ensure that a new technology achieves its potential. I think we've seen with the social media where I confess I began as somebody who wanted to highlight the positive of social media, how it could be a vehicle that would help to increase and facilitate good human communications, globalizing conversations, allowing access to people who traditionally were disadvantaged. And I really saw extraordinary potential. What I hadn't really picked up on maybe was that the business models of some of the companies led them into situations where they realized that to hold people on their individual sites, it was easier to do that if you sent the material they already agreed with. And we get the
Hmm.
famous echo chambers and we get the polarization. And I don't think we had anticipated that. So now, with the
Yeah.
development of AI, we want to engage frankly in conversation with the commercial companies who are developing it, appreciate, yes, their good intentions, but also trying to make sure that we don't inadvertently lose the benefits of something because of the commercial pressures. And we have to acknowledge that, AI is a technology that's essentially been developed by commercial companies. Many of our traditional technologies in the past were developed either by governments or by universities or by academics, where there was a certain sense of maybe non-profit in the background.
Hmm.
Whereas obviously now there is a profit, there's competition between companies, and we want to ensure that that doesn't undermine their commitment to doing things ethically. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that I think would be important. And that's one of the things we're recognizing a little bit in the document, as you say. We recognize that we've seen digitalization, how it has in some ways led to increased inequality. That inequality is not just about material inequality, it's also about political access to power,
Mm.
and even wondering at times about the fracturing of a sense of the shared human destiny. Where is the money, the enormous profits, going to be spent? Will it be spent on projects decided on democratically, or projects of individuals who have maybe a lot of good insight but may not be as necessarily as accountable to a broader global community? So
Hmm.
one of the things, and then I mean on the other side, we know that the threats of AI being developed in regimes that are more totalitarian, that are likely to be interested in the use of the AI for social control. And
Right.
we have to recognize that that too will have an impact. So it's trying to not marry any one political system, but trying to say, how best can we ensure that this technology, which has undoubted potentially to be good for human beings, could actually realize that? So how do we create structures or environments that ensure that it becomes, to some extent, accountable to people, to a larger, broader community of people?
I followed a similar trajectory myself with my view towards social media, and I think that it's also the trajectory we've seen in how various Vatican documents have talked about social media. Because I remember back in college, it was the very beginning of the Francis Pontificate for me, and everything that was coming out was, very focused on the connections that we could make
Yeah.
and the positive potential, and over time, it kind of grew to recognize, the ways that like you said, the profit motive fuels then kind of an outrage machine on social media and so on. So, I don't know that you could say definitively that the Vatican too has learned that it needs to approach new technologies in a different way, but certainly I think that it's a pattern that
Well,
we've seen a couple times.
I'm in defense. What I will say is that, the world very often expects the Vatican to be in negative and
It's
condemning.
true.
And a lot of our discussions, when we're in discussion with people from the fields of technology and science, they are sometimes suspicious of us.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what we're trying to do is to, yes, embrace, celebrate their achievements, but trying to say the real measure of the success of your achievement will be its ultimate impact on human beings. And that's not just something that the Vatican bring to the table. One of the great things that's happening is many people working in the fields of technology and science are becoming more alert to ask the question of, where is this going? What is it going to contribute to? How will it be used? And I think we're trying to join with them in that conversation.
Mhm. Bishop Day, I think some of our listeners might be surprised to hear us talk about how the Vatican has been involved in AI discussions for so long, but we can track this back to at least 2016 when the Pontifical Academy for Sciences hosted a workshop on the power and limitations of AI. I wonder if you could walk us through some of the history of the Vatican's engagement with AI.
Yeah, I think there's probably three major strands that come together. One is the Pontifical Academy for the Sciences has done some extraordinary work in bringing together some of the leading figures in the field of science to talk about what's happening technologically. And that tends to be high level discussions that produce consensus positions
Hmm.
that don't necessarily, and many of the people who belong to those academy, well, I'm thinking particularly the Academy for the hard sciences, for the sciences, but also the social sciences are interested. Many of those people are not necessarily Catholic, but they're very prominent scientists, and they're searching as human beings together to kind of offer some high level insight into where the technology is going and its
Yeah, let me
potential.
pause you there for a second because I think our listeners may not be familiar with the structure of a pontifical academy. Essentially, it's a group of, they call them academicians, but experts in a certain field. So the hard sciences, the social sciences are two examples of these that they bring together for, like you said, these discussions on a pressing issue in the field that are aimed at consensus. And then they'll issue, statements or documents that then go on to inform the Pope's documents or statements that might be on this issue, or they're just there for reference. But these are academies that are very respected in their fields and that welcome people who maybe don't agree with everything the Catholic Church teaches, who don't themselves identify as Catholic, but the Church sees this as an important area in which to dialogue with the world.
Yeah, that's a very good summary of the role of the pontifical academies. That's one strand that is
Sure.
still ongoing. The other strand was one that I had worked in the area of the Pontifical Council for Social Communications that disappeared with the unifying of all the Vatican's media operations.
Hmm.
And when we had worked in that council, we were the ones who had been promoting a lot of the material and reflection on digitalization in general,
Mm.
as well as encouraging the Vatican itself to begin to use the digital technologies. I suppose some of us there became very interested, not so much on just the possibility of digitalization to transform communications, but how it impacted society and culture in general. And then around 2016, 2015, I'm not exactly sure, we were very lucky. We were approached by a group of people from the United States, from Silicon Valley, who had made contact with a Dominican priest, Father Eric Salabier, at some tech festival in San Francisco. And he said, I could put you in contact with some people in the Vatican.
Hmm.
And essentially, this group came to the Vatican to say, look, we want to make you alert you to what's coming down the road. We really see that the AI thing is going to really take off over the next number of years. We can see it's going to have huge impact on society and on the lives of individuals. And we think you people should be thinking about it.
Mm.
So, and it began as kind of conversations where they would tell us what was happening, and in many ways having to offer a fairly basic guide to what was happening for people who are not necessarily. But then we're interested in knowing how we, as people coming with the perspectives of philosophy and theology, reflecting on what it means to be human and the anthropological issues, responded to those questions.
It's
And
so
those
interesting
dialogues.
that they approached you given that kind of hesitance that you spoke about before.
No, it was quite amazing. It was the group of 4 or 5 people who came at the beginning and brought other people along from the valley. It works under Chatham House rules, so it's kind of we respect each
Sure.
other's anonymity and those sort of things. But it became known as the Minerva Conversations, the Minerva Dialogues, and what happened really at the beginning was there was a certain shyness at the beginning, as you can imagine. Then there was a certain maybe overly respectfulness. But as we became friends, we could actually get a little bit more direct with each other.
Mm.
So what you have is a group of people now. I mean, there's new people every year. There's different people coming into that conversation. But what you have is a core group of people who know each other quite well,
Hmm.
who know each other's idiosyncrasies, biases, and prejudices, and are able to be robustly honest with each other. Because the dialogue has developed with that kind of sense of respect and friendship that allows for more honest conversations. And we were able to 2 years ago celebrate by having Pope Francis receive the delegation, the Minerva Dialogues, and address some considerations to them. So that's been, I have to say, a very privileged conversation because the people help us to know what's happening. And then, as I say, they want to know our views. They're not going to hand over and say, you people tell us what to do. There's nothing like that. But say, we are trying to be as responsible as we can about this. And we want to look to people who we see as having a traditional source of wisdom.
Hmm. Regarding the Minerva Dialogues, I understand that you have a certain level of anonymity and certainly your conversations are confidential. But since there will be public photos of the Pope's
Yeah,
meeting, can you
yeah.
talk about who's on it?
Well, you can see some of the people if you look at the photographs. I mean, we've been very lucky. The person who really has been very helpful in steering some of this was Reid Hoffman from LinkedIn. Um, we've had Eric Schmidt has been there, I think easily recognizable in the
From Microsoft.
photographs, Microsoft. And we've had some people, particularly who have facilitated, are some of the people coming from McKinsey's.
Mm,
Senior level people, and they've brought a mixture of different people. But I have to say, we've been extraordinarily privileged in terms of the quality of the people who have come and been part of those conversations.
got it. So that was the second strand. What was the third?
The third strand then was the Pontifical Academy for Life,
Mm,
which traditionally had focused more on bioethical issues.
yeah.
And as part of its reform, broadened out and began to be interested in things about robotics, possibly through originally thinking of robotics in the context of medicine and then moving out into the area of AI as well. And they took a slightly different track, which was to go for a high level consensual declaration of principles that could be shared by commercial actors and by the Vatican at some level.
Right.
And
This is the
that has
Rome call for
that's the Rome
ethics.
call, yeah, which is a very credible set of principles, not particularly unique in the sense of that they are not unlike some of the principles you will find in other ethical and governance documents. But what it was trying to do there was to try to create something of an alliance at a high level about commitments to certain values, and that has had its own importance.
Yeah, I mean, and that effort towards consensus worked in a certain way. It was signed on to by IBM, by Microsoft, by a number of universities, by the Vatican, and then also it has informed. I saw on the European Commission's website a reference to it where they used it then to as a source for
Yeah,
helping to inform their own international agreement on AI ethics.
yeah. And what we've probably tried to do subsequently, and in terms of the document that's just been published, is slightly trying to step away a little bit from simply the high level principles,
Mm,
but trying to also get a little bit more granular and also to set out our own particular where we ground those principles. What's the
hmm.
background from which we're drawing those principles?
I have a
And
question on this,
yeah,
because we've been talking about how it's different bodies in the Vatican, kind of going
yeah,
about this in their own ways, and the Rome Call came out of the Pontifical Academy for Life. Um, is this document Antiqua et Nova, which was written by your dicastery and the DDF, is that like the Vatican's official word on AI then?
I would say what it is that both our dicasteries are formally part of the Curia,
Hmm.
which the Academy for Life
Is not
is
right.
not. So this is a beginning to have a document that can be used by other departments within the Vatican to orientate their engagement. I mean,
Got it.
what we say about ethics in it and what we begin to say about some of the ethical issues is only a beginning. It's setting out some of the intuitions and insights that we think should shape how we approach the particular ethical issues. It's very much a first word intended to, in many ways, to encourage dialogue and discussion and participation.
Hmm.
And also trying to, in a sense, two things trying to say there is need for a global dialogue about where we want to go with AI, and also saying we'd like to be part of this dialogue. And these are some initial starting points that we would like to bring to the table. But
Hmm.
they're there to be discussed, dialogued with, debated, and maybe even enriched as we bring in the contributions of other people.